2 weeks passed between the attack on the council station and the moment Una received the message that would change everything again. 2 weeks of frantic preparation as species across the galaxy finally accepted that the threat was real and began mobilizing for war. The council had voted unanimously to recognize her authority over the predecessor network, had authorized her to do whatever necessary to prepare their defenses, had even offered her resources and personnel to help activate the remaining facilities. She had accepted it all while knowing that none of it would be enough, that they were preparing to fight a war their ancestors had lost using weapons they barely understood against an enemy that treated conventional physics like suggestions. The message arrived on her personal terminal in the middle of a briefing with military commanders from a dozen different species. A simple text communication from coordinates that matched one of the predecessor facilities she had assumed was destroyed or beyond salvaging. The message read like someone testing whether anyone was listening, a cautious reach across the void that carried weight despite its brevity. You're not the only heir. Come to the void sanctum. Come alone. We need to talk about what the predecessors really left behind. She stared at those words for a long moment, feeling the neural interface analyzing implications and calculating probabilities, while her human mind struggled with simpler emotions like hope and fear and desperate curiosity. Another heir meant someone else who had found a predecessor facility, someone else who carried a command badge, someone else who understood the burden she had been carrying alone for 15 years. It also meant complications, potential conflicts over authority, questions about whether this other heir had the same goals or very different ideas about what should be done with the power they inherited. Jinho argued against her going, pointing out that it could be a trap, that the Silence might have learned to mimic predecessor technology, that traveling alone to an unknown facility violated every security protocol Earth's government had established for her protection. Taman agreed with the ambassador's concerns but ultimately deferred to her judgment, recognizing that she had earned the right to make her own decisions about risks. Korath simply asked to accompany her, stating that as an archivist he had a duty to witness whatever truth this other heir might reveal, and she agreed because his ancient wisdom had proven valuable during the crisis. The coordinates led them to a location between galaxies, where space was thin and reality felt fragile, where the distances between stars stretched so vast that even light took eons to bridge the gaps. The void sanctum was massive beyond anything Una had seen before, making the other predecessor facilities look like outposts rather than major installations. It blazed with light against the cosmic darkness, every system fully operational, every reactor running at capacity, a monument to a dead civilization that somehow refused to stay dead. They docked at an airlock that opened for them without hesitation, responding to Una's badge with automated protocols, and walked through corridors that had been maintained perfectly despite the millions of years since anyone had lived here. The air was clean and fresh, the gravity comfortable, the lighting adjusted to wavelengths optimal for human vision despite the facility predating humanity by cosmic ages. Someone had been living here, maintaining systems, preparing for visitors, and Una felt her heart rate increase with anticipation and concern about who she was about to meet. She found the other heir in what looked like a command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing data from across the galaxy, tactical assessments of the Silence's movements, and projections of how the coming war might unfold. The woman turned as they entered, and Una's breath caught because looking at her was like looking at a possible future version of herself. Her eyes glowed with permanent predecessor energy signatures. Her movements carried the inhuman precision of someone who had merged too deeply with the neural interface, and her expression held the distant quality of someone who had sacrificed most of their humanity to become something else. "My name is Hyejin," the woman said, her voice carrying harmonics that weren't quite right for human vocal cords. "I found this facility 8 years ago while exploring the region beyond the galactic rim. Like you, I was changed by what I discovered here, given access to knowledge and power that no human should possess. Unlike you, I chose to embrace that transformation completely, to sacrifice what I was in order to understand what the predecessors knew." Korath moved forward, his sensory organs focused intently on Hyejin. "You have merged with the facility itself," he observed with a scholar's fascination overcoming any horror he might feel. "The neural interface is no longer just a connection, but a permanent fusion between your consciousness and the predecessor systems. I have never seen anything like this in all my years of study. Hyejin nodded, accepting the observation without shame or pride. I made the choice your commander Yuna has been avoiding, pushed past the point where the transformation could be reversed. In doing so, I gained access to the complete predecessor archives, every memory and record they left behind, including the truths they tried to hide from anyone who might come after them. Yuna felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with temperature. What truths? She asked, though part of her already suspected the answer, had felt hints of it in the incomplete data she had accessed, had wondered why the predecessor archives always felt like they were holding something back. That the silence isn't what they told you, Hyejin said simply. It isn't some external enemy that emerged from the void to destroy them. They created it, built it as a weapon to use against rival civilizations, an experiment in entropy manipulation that would unmake their enemies at a fundamental level. But they lost control of their creation. The silence gained independence, developed its own form of intelligence, and turned on the predecessors along with every other species it encountered. Everything that happened to them, every world that burned and every civilization that fell, they brought it on themselves through arrogance and the belief that they could play with forces beyond their understanding. The words hit Yuna like physical blows, destroying the narrative she had built her entire mission around. She had thought she was preparing to fight an external threat, to defend against an evil that had destroyed a noble civilization. Instead, she had been preparing to clean up a mess left by beings who had doomed themselves through their own hubris, who had left their weapons and knowledge not as gifts but as tools to fix their catastrophic mistake. The 17 facilities you've been trying to activate, Hyejin continued, pulling up schematics that showed the complete predecessor network in detail. They weren't designed primarily as defensive installations. They're components of a weapon system, one that when fully activated can release a wave of dimensional collapse that will destroy the silence utterly. But the cost of using this weapon is measured in solar systems, in inhabited worlds that will be consumed by the same entropy field that erases the enemy. The predecessors knew this, accepted it as necessary, and left the activation codes hoping that whoever inherited their legacy would have the courage to do what they couldn't. Yuna stared at the projections showing predicted casualties, watching as the numbers climbed into the billions, entire civilizations marked for sacrifice to defeat the threat the predecessors had created. You brought me here to convince me to activate this weapon, she said quietly. To tell me that we have no choice but to murder billions to save trillions. I brought you here to show you the truth, Hyejin corrected. What you do with that knowledge is your decision to make. I've already begun preparing the facilities under my control for final activation, because I believe the silence cannot be stopped any other way. It doesn't negotiate, doesn't feel mercy, doesn't even really understand what life means. It was programmed to consume and replicate, and that's all it will ever do until something stops it permanently. We can sacrifice some worlds now or watch all worlds fall eventually. Korath spoke up, his ancient voice carrying wisdom earned over centuries. The predecessors were powerful but not wise, he said. They built weapons without considering consequences, pursued knowledge without ethical constraints, and ultimately destroyed themselves through their own creations. Perhaps the inheritance they left was not meant to be accepted without question, but to be improved upon by those who came after, by beings capable of learning from their mistakes rather than repeating them. Yuna felt the neural interface processing options, calculating probabilities, offering her tactical assessments of how the war would play out under different scenarios. But beneath that cold calculation, her human mind refused to accept that genocide was the only answer, that the predecessor's final solution was the only path forward. There had to be another way, some option that didn't require becoming the same kind of monster the silence was. What if we don't activate the weapon? She asked. What if we use the network as it was supposed to be used before the predecessors turned it into a doomsday device? Can the facilities defend without destroying? The council chamber stretched wide like an arena, and Taman stood at its center feeling small beneath the curved dome of alien glass. Hundreds of species watched from their designated platforms, and their eyes gleamed with curiosity or contempt, or something between those things that he could not name. He adjusted his diplomatic jacket, and felt the weight of Earth pressing down on his shoulders like gravity from a heavier world. Hyeri stood 3 steps behind him, and her datapad trembled slightly in her hands, though she tried to hide it. She was brilliant with xenobiology and languages, but this was her first time at the Galactic Council, and the pressure showed in the tight line of her mouth. Jiho waited near the entrance with 5 other security personnel, and his hand never strayed far from his sidearm, even though weapons were forbidden in the chamber. Old habits died hard for soldiers. The Kethrian ambassador rose from her platform and silence fell like a blade. Velshara moved with fluid grace, and her scales caught the light in patterns of deep emerald and black. She was tall, and her species had evolved from apex predators on a world that killed most visitors within hours. Her eyes were vertical slits of gold, and when she smiled, her fangs showed long and curved and designed for tearing the humans' petition for passage through our trade routes, she said, and her voice carried a hiss that made the translator work harder to smooth out the sounds. They wish to expand their merchant fleet through territory my people have controlled for 3,000 years. Taman nodded once and kept his face neutral. This was expected, and the Kethrians were known for their territorial nature and their pride. He had studied their culture for months and knew that directness was valued over flowery speech. "We do," he said simply. "Earth offers fair trade agreements and mutual defense pacts in exchange for access." Velshara descended from her platform, and other ambassadors shifted uncomfortably as she approached. The Kethrians rarely left their designated areas during formal sessions, and her movement suggested something unscripted was about to happen. Taman held his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to step back. She circled him slowly like a predator assessing prey, and her clawed feet clicked against the polished floor. "Humanity has been part of this council for 30 years, she said, and her tail swished behind her with casual menace. "You are infants in galactic terms, and your species is weak." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, and Hieri's datapad beeped a warning that Taman ignored. He knew where this was going, and interrupting now would only make things worse. "Your bones break easily," Velshara continued, and she was close enough now that he could smell the sulfur scent of her breath. "Your skin tears and your bodies fail in temperatures that my children play in, and you require constant oxygen and water and food like fragile flowers that wilt without perfect conditions." She was not wrong, and Taman knew it. Humans were not the strongest or fastest or most durable species in the galaxy, and dozens of worlds would kill an unprotected human in minutes. But strength came in many forms, and endurance was humanity's gift, even if these aliens did not understand it yet. "You wish to travel through space that would destroy your ships if your systems failed?" Velshara said, and she stopped directly in front of him. "You wish us to trust that you can handle the dangers when you cannot even handle our climate." "We have handled every challenge we have faced," Taman replied, and kept his voice level. "Humanity has survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly destroyed us, and we are still here." Velshara laughed, and it sounded like rocks grinding together. "Survival on your soft world means nothing here," she said. "I could kill you in seconds, human, and your vaunted endurance would mean nothing against my venom." The chamber went deathly quiet, and even the translator struggled with the sudden tension. Jiho moved forward half a step, but Taman raised one hand slightly and his captain froze. This was a critical moment, and how Taman responded would determine everything. "Perhaps," Taman said, and allowed himself a small smile. "But you will not." Velshara's pupils narrowed to slits, and her scales seemed to darken with anger. "You doubt my capability?" "I doubt your certainty," Taman replied. "If humans were as weak as you claim, then we would not be here at all." For a long moment nothing happened, and the weight of 1,000 alien eyes pressed down on both of them. Then Velshara stepped back and spread her arms wide in a gesture that Taman recognized from his cultural studies as a formal challenge. "Very well, human," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the chamber. "I invoke the ancient right of the arena of worth, and if you truly believe your species deserves respect, then prove it where words cannot lie." Hieri gasped behind him, and her datapad clattered to the floor. The arena of worth was legendary, and not in a good way. It was a Kethrian tradition older than their space program, and designed to test whether a species had the right to claim strength. The rules were simple and brutal. 1 hour in an arena that simulated Kethria's natural environment while facing a Kethrian warrior in single combat. Most species died within 10 minutes, and the record for survival was 43 minutes, held by a Graxian warrior who had been considered one of the toughest beings in the galaxy. That warrior had still died. "You cannot be serious," called out Ambassador Thorne from the Centauri delegation. "No human has ever attempted this, and the mortality rate is absolute." "Then perhaps they should not make claims about their strength," Velshara replied, without taking her eyes off Taman. The human speaks of endurance and challenges, but words are empty without proof. Taman felt his heart rate increase but kept his breathing steady. This was a trap and also an opportunity, and refusing would brand humanity as cowards forever, while accepting meant almost certain death. He thought of Earth spinning in space and all the people depending on this mission and all the trade routes that would open if they succeeded here. He thought of his training in Special Forces and the desert operations where the temperature hit 60 degrees and men died of heat stroke. He thought of the shuttle crash on Titan's moon, where he had survived 3 days in sub-zero temperatures waiting for rescue. He thought of every impossible thing humans had done throughout history because they were too stubborn to quit. Jiho was speaking urgently into his comm and probably calling for orders from Earth, but the answer would take too long, and the moment was now. Hiyeri was crying silently and her hands covered her mouth. The other ambassadors watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. Taman reached up and unbuttoned his diplomatic jacket slowly and deliberately. The fabric was expensive and carried Earth's seal, but it meant nothing in the face of what was coming. He slipped it off and handed it to Hiyeri, who took it with shaking hands. Beneath the jacket, his dress shirt showed the edges of scars on his forearms and collarbone, remnants of a life before diplomacy when he had been a soldier, and survival was measured in heartbeats. He rolled his shoulders and met Velshara's golden eyes with complete calm. "I accept your challenge," he said, and his voice carried clearly through the silent chamber. 1 hour in your arena against your warrior under your conditions." Velshara's expression shifted slightly, and for just a moment, something like surprise flickered across her reptilian features. She had expected him to refuse, and his acceptance had disrupted whatever game she was playing. But she recovered quickly and bared her fangs in what might have been a smile. "You will die human," she hissed, and her tail lashed once. "Your body will fail and your species will learn humility." Taman smiled back, and the expression was genuine and unbothered. "We shall see," he said quietly. "We shall see." The chamber erupted into chaos as ambassadors shouted and aides scrambled and security forces mobilized. But Taman stood perfectly still at the center of it all, and his smile never wavered. He had made his choice, and now there was only the path forward. Yeri grabbed his arm, and her face was pale. "You cannot do this," she whispered urgently. "The survival rate is 0 for humans, and you will die in that arena." "Probably," Taman agreed and placed his hand over hers. "But if I refuse, then humanity will never be respected here and every door will close forever." "Then let them close," Hiyeri said, and tears streaked her cheeks. "You are more important than trade routes." Taman shook his head gently. "I am one man," he said, "and Earth needs this." Jiho appeared at his other side, and his expression was grim. "Orders from command are to withdraw immediately," he said. "They are calling this a setup and want you back on the ship within the hour." "Tell command I am unavailable," Taman replied and straightened his shoulders. "Tell them I am busy ensuring our future." Velshara watched this exchange from her platform, and her golden eyes gleamed with something that might have been respect or might have been anticipation of victory. She raised one clawed hand, and the chamber fell silent again. "The challenge is accepted," she announced. "Preparation time is 48 hours, and then the arena of worth will open, and we shall see what humanity is truly made of." Taman nodded once and turned to walk toward the exit. His legs were steady and his hands did not shake, though inside his mind was already racing through everything he would need to do to have even the slightest chance of survival. Hiyeri and Jiho followed, and around them the chamber dissolved into heated debate. The human quarters on the station felt smaller than usual, and Taman sat at the center of the main room while Hiyeri paced back and forth with her datapad, projecting holographic charts into the air. 46 hours remained until the arena opened, and every second mattered more than the last. "Kethrian physiology is fascinating in the worst possible way," Hiyeri said, and her fingers swiped through anatomical diagrams that rotated in blue light. "Their venom contains 17 different neurotoxins, and each one targets a different system, and there is no antivenom that works on human biology." Taman watched the diagrams and committed details to memory. Knowledge was survival and understanding. His opponent was the first step toward lasting even a few minutes. "How long does the venom take to kill?" 3 to 7 minutes, depending on the injection site," Hiyeri replied, and her voice was clinical now, which meant she was burying her fear under layers of science. "But you will be incapacitated within 90 seconds and paralysis sets in almost immediately. So do not get bitten." Taman said and allowed himself a grim smile. That is an incredibly insufficient strategy. Hieri shot back, but there was no real anger in it. They both knew how impossible this situation was, and humor was sometimes the only defense against despair. Jiho entered carrying equipment cases, and behind him came 3 other members of the security team. They had been working on gathering everything that might help, and regulations limited what Taman could bring into the arena, but creativity found ways around most rules. Temperature range in the arena simulates Kethria's surface environment, Jiho said and set down a case. 65 degrees Celsius, which is 149 Fahrenheit, and that alone will kill most humans in under an hour, even without fighting. Most humans have not spent 3 months in the Sahara during the war, Taman replied and stood to examine the equipment. His body still remembered those days and the heat that turned men into corpses within hours, if they were not careful. Hieri pulled up atmospheric data, and it painted an even grimmer picture. Oxygen concentration in the arena will be 8% compared to Earth's 21%, she said. You will be operating at the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest while fighting for your life in a sauna. Delightful, Taman said, and picked up a breathing apparatus from the case. It was minimal and designed to supplement oxygen without violating the rules about life support systems. How much will this help? Maybe 10% improvement, Jiho said. Better than nothing, but not enough to level the playing field. Taman nodded and set it aside. Every advantage mattered, no matter how small. He moved to the environmental suits and found one designed for high heat tolerance. It was thin and flexible, but rated for extreme temperatures. This will work. It will keep you alive longer, but not comfortable, Hieri warned. The suit regulates heat but cannot eliminate it, and you will still be operating in conditions that would hospitalize most people. Most people are not attempting the arena of worth, Taman replied and began sorting through hydration packs. His special forces training had taught him that water management was critical in desert operations, and this would be no different. The next 6 hours were spent in preparation and testing. Taman cycled through heat chambers that progressively increased temperature, while Hieri monitored his vital signs and adjusted the support systems. His body adapted slowly and painfully, and sweat poured off him in rivers. Heart rate is 180, Hieri called out during one session. Core temperature is 39.5 and rising. Continue. Taman gasped and forced his legs to keep moving. He was running on a treadmill in a chamber set to 60 degrees, and every breath felt like inhaling fire. His vision blurred at the edges and his muscles screamed, but he kept going because stopping meant death in 2 days. Jiho watched from outside the chamber, and his expression was grim. He is going to kill himself before he even reaches the arena, he muttered to one of the other security officers. He is going to kill himself in the arena regardless, the officer replied. At least this way he goes down fighting. After 30 minutes, Taman collapsed and his legs gave out, and he hit the treadmill hard. Jiho was through the door in seconds and dragged him out while Hieri rushed over with cooling packs and emergency hydration. Enough, Jiho said firmly. You need rest, not suicide by training. Taman lay on the floor and his chest heaved and every muscle trembled. But after a moment he pushed himself up to sitting and shook his head. Again, he said, We go again in 30 minutes. You are insane, Hieri said. But she was already checking his vitals and preparing the next session. Absolutely insane. Probably, Taman agreed and accepted a hydration pack. He drank slowly and felt the liquid doing almost nothing to quench the fire in his throat. But insanity is just sanity that has not been proven yet. Over the next day, the training intensified and Taman pushed his body past every limit he thought he had. He spent hours in heat chambers in low-oxygen environments and combined stress tests that left him vomiting and shaking, but each time he got up and demanded to go again. Between sessions, Hieri briefed him on Kethrian combat techniques, and they were as brutal as expected. The species relied on overwhelming speed and natural weapons to end fights quickly. Their claws could tear through standard body armor, and their tail was strong enough to break bones. They are ambush predators by evolution, Hieri explained and pulled up combat footage from previous arena matches. They strike fast and hard and expect their opponent to fall within the first minute. Taman watched a Kethrian warrior move across the screen, and the speed was terrifying. The warrior covered 10 meters in less than 2 seconds and struck with precision that left no room for error. What happens if the fight goes longer? It never does, Hieri said quietly. The longest recorded match was 43 minutes, and that warrior spent most of it running and hiding before the venom finally killed him. So endurance is not their strength, Taman noted, and his mind began working on strategy. They are built for quick kills, not extended combat. Yeri nodded slowly. Their homeworld is lethal even to them, she said. They evolved to hunt fast and return to shelter before the environment could drain them. Then we make it a marathon, not a sprint, Taman said, and something like hope flickered in his chest. It was small and fragile, but it was there. Jiho returned with news that made everyone pause. A Kethrian observer requested permission to watch your training, he said. I denied it, but the request itself is unusual. Let them watch, Taman said, and stood up from where he had been stretching. Let them see what humans can do. The observer arrived an hour later, and it was a junior member of Velshara's delegation. The Kethrian stood at the window of the training chamber and watched with golden eyes that revealed nothing. Taman nodded once in acknowledgement, and then began his session. The heat chamber climbed to 65 degrees, and Taman moved through combat drills while breathing through the supplemental oxygen mask. His movements were not as fast as a Kethrian, but they were efficient and controlled. Sweat soaked through his training clothes within minutes, but he did not stop. 20 minutes passed, and Taman was still moving, while the Kethrian observer shifted uncomfortably. 30 minutes, and Taman stumbled but caught himself and continued. At 40 minutes, his legs gave out and he fell to his knees, gasping. Jiho opened the chamber door, but Taman held up one hand. Not yet, he rasped. Timer goes to 45. You are going to die, Jiho said, but his voice carried something like pride. Not today, Taman replied and forced himself to stand. His legs shook and his vision tunneled, but he stayed upright for the final 5 minutes. When the timer finally ended, he walked out of the chamber on his own power and nodded to the Kethrian observer. Tell your ambassador I look forward to our meeting, he said. The observer stared at him for a long moment and then left without a word. Yeri rushed over with cooling packs and hydration, but Taman waved her off gently. Save it for tomorrow, he said. I need to know my limits, not hide from them. That evening, the human quarters were quiet, and Taman sat alone looking at images of Earth on his personal display. Blue oceans and green continents and white clouds that covered a world where humans had learned to survive. Everywhere from frozen tundra to burning. Desert Cheery found him there and sat down beside him without speaking. They watched Earth together, and the silence was comfortable in the way that only comes from shared understanding of impossible situations. I did not think you would actually do this, Yeri finally said. When you accepted the challenge, I thought you had lost your mind. Maybe I did, Taman replied. But someone had to. Why you? Yeri asked. Why not refuse and let the politicians figure out another way? Taman thought about it, and the answer came from somewhere deep in his chest, where fear and courage mixed together. Because I have already died once, he said quietly. Yeri looked at him sharply. What do you mean? The shuttle crash on Titan's moon 5 years ago, Taman said, and his hand unconsciously touched a scar on his neck. I was dead for 3 minutes before the medics brought me back, and in those 3 minutes I understood something. What? Yeri whispered. That humans are not afraid of death because we have already accepted. The arena doors opened like the mouth of a furnace, and heat rolled out in waves that distorted the air. Taman stepped through, and the door sealed behind him with a finality that echoed in his bones. There was no turning back now, and no rescue if things went wrong. The arena stretched out before him like a nightmare made real. Red sand covered the ground, and jagged rocks jutted up at odd angles, casting sharp shadows. The dome above simulated Kethria's sun, and the light was harsh and yellow and made everything look sick. Temperature gauges in his suit immediately began climbing towards 65 degrees. Taman walked forward slowly, and his boots sank slightly into the sand with each step. The air tasted wrong even through his supplemental oxygen mask, and he could feel the sulfur compounds burning his throat. 8% oxygen meant every breath gave him less than half what his body wanted, and his lungs already ached. Around the arena perimeter, thousands of holographic faces watched from hundreds of species. He could see Yeri's projection near the front, and her expression was tight with worry. Jiho stood beside her, and his hand was pressed against the transparent barrier as if he could reach through and pull Taman to safety. The opposite door opened, and Karvesh entered with the fluid grace of a born predator. The Kethrian warrior was larger than Velshara, and his scales were darker and marked with scars that spoke of many victories. He carried no weapons because he needed none. His claws were black and curved, and his tail moved behind him like a club wrapped in muscle. "Human," Karvesh said, and his voice was a deep hiss that the translator struggled with. "You should have refused this challenge and died with dignity in your bed instead of shame in our arena." Taman did not respond because words were useless now. He centered himself and felt his training take over. The fear was still there, but pushed down beneath layers of focus that special forces had beaten into him over years of impossible missions. A timer appeared in holographic display above the arena, and it read 60 minutes in glowing numbers. Beside it was a death counter showing how many challengers had died in this arena over the centuries. The number was 347, and Taman would likely become 348. The timer began counting down, and Karvesh moved. He crossed the distance between them in seconds, and his speed was exactly as terrifying as the training footage had shown. Taman threw himself sideways and felt claws rake across his shoulder, where he had been standing. Pain flared hot and immediate, and the suit tore like paper under those claws. 3 parallel cuts opened across his shoulder, and blood began soaking into the torn fabric. But Taman rolled to his feet and kept moving, because stopping meant death. Karvesh pursued without pause, and his attacks came in combinations that left no room for counterattack. Claw strikes followed by tail sweeps followed by attempts to close distance and bite. Taman evaded and blocked and retreated, and every movement cost him precious energy in the brutal heat. The first 5 minutes were pure survival, and Taman felt his body screaming under the strain. Sweat poured off him and soaked through his suit, and the heat was worse than any desert he had trained in. His heart hammered at 160 beats per minute, and his oxygen-starved muscles began to burn. Karvesh struck again, and this time Taman was too slow. Claws caught his forearm and opened it to the bone. More worrying was the tail sweep that caught him in the ribs and threw him 6 meters across the arena. He hit the sand hard, and the impact drove the air from his lungs. "Get up!" He heard Jaiho shouting from somewhere beyond the barrier. "Get up, Taman." Taman pushed himself up and tasted blood in his mouth. Something was broken in his ribs, and every breath sent lightning through his chest. Karvesh was already charging again, and his golden eyes showed no mercy because mercy had no place in the arena of worth. They clashed again, and Taman managed to land a strike against Karvesh's side, but it did nothing against those armored scales. The Kethrian laughed, and the sound was like rocks grinding, and his next attack was faster. Fangs sank into Taman's thigh, and the pain was immediate and electric. Venom pumped into his bloodstream, and Karvesh released him with a satisfied hiss. The warrior stepped back and watched with the patience of a predator who knew the kill was already done. Taman felt the venom spreading like ice through his veins, and his leg began to go numb. 90 seconds, Yeri had said, before paralysis, and then 3 to 7 minutes until death. He had maybe 2 minutes of consciousness left. The holographic crowd went silent because this was how every arena challenge ended. The challenger fought well, and then the venom ended them, and the only question was how long they took to die. Tamin saw Yeri cover her face and Jiho slam his fist against the barrier. "You fought better than most, human," Karvesh said, and there was genuine respect in his voice. "But your body cannot handle our venom, and soon you will sleep forever." Taman stood on his good leg and felt his vision starting to blur. The venom was working fast, and his heart raced trying to pump the toxin through his system. Every beat spread the poison further, and every second brought him closer to collapse. But something strange was happening. The paralysis that should have claimed him was spreading slower than Karvesh expected. Human immune systems were adaptable and generalist and designed to fight thousands of different threats. Taman's body was mounting a defense even though it could not win, not yet. Taman said, and his voice was thick. "Not yet." He moved forward, and his poisoned leg dragged but still functioned. Karvesh's eyes widened slightly because challengers did not advance after being bitten. They fell and died, and that was the natural order of things. Taman struck, and the blow was weak, but it landed. Karvesh blocked easily and countered with claws that opened Taman's side. More blood joined the rest, and the sand beneath them turned dark with it. But Taman kept moving. The timer read 52 minutes remaining, and the crowd began to murmur. This was lasting longer than most challenges, but not unusually so. Taman would fall soon, and the arena would claim another victim. 2 minutes passed, and Taman was still conscious. His leg barely worked, and his vision kept fading at the edges. But he stayed upright through sheer force of will. Karvesh looked confused now because the venom should have finished him. "Why do you not fall?" the warrior demanded, and struck again. Claws raked Taman's chest and opened new wounds. "The venom is in you, and your body should be shutting down." Should, Taman gasped. But is not 3 minutes and his heart was still beating. 4 minutes and he was still standing. At 5 minutes, Karavesh realized something was wrong and pressed his attack with renewed fury. If the venom would not kill the human, then he would do it with claws, but the renewed assault cost energy and the brutal heat, and Karavesh was breathing harder now. Kethrians were ambush predators and long fights were not their specialty. The arena simulated their homeworld perfectly, which meant it was lethal even to them if they stayed too long. Taman noticed the change, and his tactical mind began working despite the venom fog. Karavesh was slowing down slightly, and his movements were not as sharp as they had been. The warrior was overheating. The realization hit like lightning through the poison haze. The arena was not designed for extended combat, because Kethrians could not fight for extended periods in their own environment. The challenge was meant to kill quickly or not at all. "You are slowing down," Taman said, and he knew his speech was slurred, but the words came out. "The heat is affecting you too." Karavesh snarled and attacked, but this time Taman saw the strike coming and evaded. The warrior was definitely slower and his breathing was labored. Taman checked the timer and it read 45 minutes remaining. "Impossible," someone in the crowd shouted. "He should be dead." Yeti was staring at her datapad with an expression of disbelief. "His immune system is fighting the venom," she said to Jiho. "It is not winning, but it is buying time and slowing the effects." "How long can he last?" Jiho asked. "I do not know," Yeri admitted. "This has never happened before." In the arena, Taman forced his body to keep moving. His poisoned leg was useless now and his other wounds bled freely. But he stayed upright. Karavesh circled him and the warrior's confidence had been replaced with something that looked like concern. "You are dying," Karavesh said. But he sounded less certain. "The venom will finish you." Eventually, Taman agreed. But not in the next 45 minutes. He lunged forward with speed that should have been impossible given his condition, and landed a strike against Karvesh's throat where the scales were thinner. The warrior recoiled and his tail lashed out on instinct, catching Taman in the chest and throwing him down again. Taman hit the sand and coughed blood. His broken ribs grated together and the pain was white-hot. But he rolled to his side and pushed himself up to his knees. Standing was harder this time and his good leg trembled under his weight. "Stay down," Karvesh said, and there was almost pleading in his voice. "You have fought well, human, but this is madness." "Madness is humanity's specialty," Taman replied and gained his feet. He swayed and his vision blurred, but he was upright. "We do not know when to quit." The crowd was no longer silent and voices rose in confusion and shock. No one had ever lasted this long against Kethrian venom, and no one had pushed a warrior to visible exhaustion. The impossible was happening in front of thousands of witnesses. 20 minutes remained on the timer, and Taman's world had narrowed to simple mathematics. Each breath was a calculation of oxygen gained versus energy spent, and each heartbeat pumped venom and blood in equal measure through veins that should have collapsed minutes ago. Hyeri watched his vital signs from outside the arena, and her hands shook so badly she could barely hold her datapad. "Heart rate 200 beats per minute," she said to Jiho, and her voice cracked. "Core temperature 40.3 degrees and his oxygen saturation is at 68%, and he should be unconscious." "But he is not," Jiho said, and his voice carried something between horror and pride. "The stubborn bastard is still standing." In the arena, Karavesh was breathing in harsh gasps that sounded like a bellows working overtime. The warrior's scales had lost their shine and heat stress showed in every movement. Kethrians were apex predators, but even apex predators had limits, and the environment that birthed them demanded respect. "You cannot continue," Karavesh said, and advanced slowly. "Your body is destroyed and you stand only through madness." Taman did not waste breath on words and instead focused on staying upright. His poisoned leg had no feeling below the knee, and his other leg trembled with exhaustion. 3 broken ribs meant every breath was agony, and his wounds had stopped bleeding only because he had no more blood to lose. But his mind was still working, and his tactical training cut through the fog of pain. Karavesh was slower than before, and the warrior sought shade between attacks. Overheating was affecting him, and the long battle was doing exactly what Taman had hoped. He moved right, and Karavesh followed, and then Taman reversed direction. The warrior's reaction time was delayed by half a second, and that half second was everything. Taman gained distance and put a rock formation between them. "Stop running." Karavesh roared, and his frustration was clear. "Face me with honor." Honor is for those who can afford it, Taman gasped. I am just trying not to die. The crowd had gone from shocked silence to active debate, and voices rose in hundreds of languages. Betting systems that had assumed Taman's death were now in chaos, and political observers were already calculating what this meant for humanity's position. Shara stood at the barrier, and her expression was unreadable. She had issued this challenge expecting quick victory and clear proof of human weakness. Instead, she was watching her finest warrior struggle against a man who should have been dead 10 minutes ago. Taman circled a large boulder, and his vision kept fading at the edges. The venom had spread through his entire system now, and his immune response was losing the battle. But losing slowly was still better than losing quickly, and every second mattered. Karvesh appeared around the boulder faster than expected, and his tail caught Taman in the side. Bones that were already broken shattered further, and Taman was thrown into the sand. He hit hard and tasted blood and bile, and for a moment everything went dark. When his vision returned, Karvesh was standing over him, and the warrior's claws were raised for a killing strike. This was it, and there was no escape and no more tricks. Taman looked up at his death approaching and found he was not afraid. You fought well, human, Karvesh said, and there was genuine respect in his exhausted voice. Better than any challenger I have faced. The claws descended, and Taman could not move fast enough to evade, but his hand shot out and grabbed Karvesh's wrist. The warrior was stronger, but the heat and exhaustion had weakened him, and Taman's grip held for one precious second. Not yet, Taman said through bloody teeth. Not yet. He used Karvesh's own momentum and pulled. The warrior stumbled forward off balance, and Taman rolled aside. It was clumsy and desperate, but it worked. Karvesh crashed into the sand where Taman had been, and the warrior's breathing was ragged. Taman crawled away, and his arms barely supported his weight. Standing seemed impossible, but he had thought that 5 times already and been wrong each time. He planted his good leg and pushed, and gravity fought him every centimeter, but eventually he was upright again. The timer read 15 minutes, and the crowd had gone silent again. This was beyond anything they had expected, and the impossible was becoming routine. No challenger had ever reached this point, and no one knew what happened if the hour actually completed. How is he still moving? Someone asked in the crowd. Human stubbornness. Another answered. They are built wrong and refuse to accept it. Karvesh rose from the sand slowly, and his movements were labored. The warrior had been in the arena for 45 minutes now, and the heat that he had evolved to handle in short bursts was cooking him from inside. His species hunted fast and retreated to shelter, but there was no shelter here. We are both dying, Karvesh said, and it was not a question. This arena will claim us both if we continue. Then we both continue, Taman replied, because neither of us can stop. They faced each other across 5 meters of red sand, and both were destroyed by the environment and by each other. Karvesh's scales were dull, and his tail dragged in the sand. Taman swayed on his feet, and blood soaked his entire suit. The warrior attacked again, but this time it was different. The speed was gone, and the strikes were heavy and slow. Taman evaded, and the movement was more of a controlled fall, but it worked. They were both operating on instinct now and training in something deeper that had no name. 10 minutes remained, and Taman's hallucinations started. He saw Earth hanging in space and deserts stretching forever, and his old unit from Special Forces standing in the sand. They were not real, but they felt real, and they shouted encouragement. Do not quit, his old commander said, and the hallucination was perfect. Humans do not quit, I know, Taman whispered. I know, Karvesh struck, and Taman blocked with his forearm. Bones broke under the impact, but the claws did not reach his throat. He countered with a weak punch that hit Karvesh's jaw, and did almost nothing but made the warrior step back. They were no longer fighting, and instead just trying to outlast each other. It was raw and ugly and had nothing to do with skill anymore. 2 beings from different worlds pushing their bodies past every reasonable limit, because pride demanded it. 8 minutes left, and Karvesh fell to one knee. The warrior tried to rise and could not. His strength was gone, and the heat had finally won. He looked up at Taman with golden eyes that held no shame. Finish it, Karvesh said. You have earned victory, human. Taman stumbled forward, and his legs barely worked. He could end this now and claim triumph, but something stopped him. Karvesh had fought with honor, and pushing the warrior to this point was victory enough, no? Taman said. You fought well, and I will not dishonor that. He walked past Karvesh toward the center of the arena, and each step was a battle against gravity and biology and common sense. The warrior watched him go with an expression that might have been gratitude or might have been respect. The crowd erupted in confusion because challengers did not show mercy, and warriors did not receive it. This was not how the arena of worth worked, and Taman was breaking ancient rules through simple human compassion. "What is he doing?" Velshara demanded. "The warrior is vulnerable and he walks away." "He is making a point," Yeri said quietly. "He is showing that humans value honor over victory." Taman reached the center of the arena, and the timer read 6 minutes. His body was screaming at him to lie down, and his vision was fading faster now. The venom had spread to his heart and lungs and brain, and his immune system had finally lost the battle. But 6 minutes was enough time to prove something important. He lowered himself to sitting position and crossed his legs in meditation pose. It hurt worse than anything he had ever felt, but he managed it. Then he closed his eyes and waited. "Is he meditating?" Jiho asked in disbelief. "He is showing them he is not afraid," Yeri said, and tears streamed down her face. "He is treating this like a casual rest." The crowd watched in stunned silence as Taman sat perfectly still in the center of the killing arena. His breathing was shallow and his body was broken, but his posture suggested calm acceptance. It was the ultimate display of human defiance. 5 minutes remaining and Karvesh had managed to stand again. The warrior limped toward the edge of the arena, seeking any shade, and his exhaustion was complete. He looked back at the human sitting in meditation, and something in his expression changed. 4 minutes and Taman's heartbeat slowed. The venom was winning, and his body was shutting down system by system, but he had made it this far, and 4 minutes might as well be forever. 3 minutes and hallucinations took over completely. He was back on Earth and sitting by a river, and the water was cool and clean. His mother was there, and she smiled at him with pride. "You did well," she said. "Thank you," Taman replied to the hallucination. "I tried." 2 minutes and medical teams were gathering at the arena entrance. Yeri was shouting at them to be ready because the moment the timer ended, they would have seconds to save him if saving was even possible. 1 minute and the crowd counted down together. Hundreds of species unified in witnessing something that should not have been possible. A human had survived the arena of worth, and not through strength or speed, but through simple stubborn refusal to die 30 seconds. And Taman opened his eyes one last time. The arena swam in his vision, but he could see the timer counting down. So close now, and he just needed to hold on a little longer.